knock on wood, everything seems to be working. Happy Cinco de Mayo and Taco Tuesday and all that jazz. You would think that we would be making tacos today, but we are not. I figured by this point it's too late for you guys to actually make anything. So, sorry, I'm trying to get to the comments over here. So we're actually moving on to something else. This is actually one of the most popular recipes on my site and one of my family's all-time favorites. Like if you ask the kids what recipe they want, there's two that come to mind. Our copycat penne rustica and this gumbo. Those are my kids' top two favorites, hands down. Now, when I shared this on Facebook for the first time, people were freaking out in the comments section talking about how unauthentic it was, that it wasn't gumbo, it was a terrible recipe, I didn't know what I was talking about, I was an awful, awful cook, chef. And I was really surprised by it because I had gotten this recipe from a woman who was born and raised in Louisiana. And so I started doing research on what exactly makes up gumbo. Like I had always thought that this was gumbo, and it is. I'll explain why in a minute. Hold on, I'm trying to get to the comment section. And so I started doing research. Turns out there are two distinct, to be fair, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gumbo recipes. Every family has their own version of this. They all think that theirs is the one. I totally get that. I feel that way about a lot of Mexican recipes that I got from my grandma who grew up in Mexico, and I'll see other ones, I'm like, that's not how you make that. But the truth is there's a lot of ways to make everything. And gumbo, being what it is, it's a Louisianan recipe, and it comes from a background of French, African, Spanish, and German. So it comes from all these different influences, so it's no surprise that everybody has their own version of it. But within all the versions of gumbo that are out there, there are two distinct factions. One is the Cajun and one is the Creole. So the Cajun version tends to use gumbo as the thickener, where the Creole version tends to use roux as a thickener. Now they both can sometimes use roux, no big deal, but they all start the same way. Gumbo has a thickener, then you add the veggies and cook it down. And then you add everything else, your meat, your broth, salt and pepper. It's not a heavily spiced dish traditionally, but that doesn't mean that people don't heavily spice it in their own version. It's usually salt, pepper, sometimes a red pepper as well, are traditional spices. Bay leaf and thyme are traditional spices, and then hot sauce is also a traditional additive to this. So the Creole version tends to be, because it's made with basically the roux as the thickener, but you cook the roux until it's a really dark color. Now, the darker the roux, the more flavor it has, but the less thickening it is. So the Creole version tends to be thinner. Now, they're both soups and stews that are served over rice. Now, the Cajun version tends to use a thickener that is okra, and so it tends to be thicker and darker without the and then Creole also, sorry, my brain's just everywhere. Creole dishes also tends to use tomatoes, and that's the thing where I get the most comments. People will freak out that there are some tomatoes in mine. They're like, what? No okra and tomatoes? They're all thinking Cajun. It's definitely by far the more popular, the most well-known gumbo, but there is this faction of Creole gumbo. That's what I make. Now, traditionally, Creole gumbo is made with shellfish and sausage, sometimes chicken, where Cajun gumbo is made with fowl, duck, or chicken and sausage, and then sometimes shellfish, right? So they both can have the same meats, but shellfish is more of a base of the Creole. This is a Creole gumbo, but my kids don't really care for shrimp and shellfish. I do. I love it, but they don't. So I tend to make it without. If you want to add it, I will tell you how and when to do that. It's at the end, obviously. The other thing about, let's start the meat, and then I'll keep talking. So, oops. I'm getting my camera all set up before we get started. All right, and okay, I have my pan already heated up. And go ahead and let me know if you are getting, if you can see this and are getting comments. All right, so we're going to cook the meat first and brown it. So this is andouille sausage. And then my kids do like chicken, so I am adding some chicken thighs as well. We're going to add a little salt. And a little pepper. And give this a stir. I already put some oil in the bottom of the pan. And what we're really just trying to do is brown the meat and bring out those flavors. Now you can use chicken breast or chicken thighs. Again, chicken is not necessarily traditional with Creole Gumbo. So you can just do the sausage and then later add the shrimp. It's your choice. So one of the other things about gumbo, so you start with, if you need to pre-cook or pre-brown any of the meat, do that first. That's what we're doing now. And then we're going to take the meat out, and then we're going to make the base gravy or sauce for this soup. So we're going to start with a roux. The darker you make the roux, the more flavorful, the less thickening it is. Then we're going to add our trio of veggies, onion, bell pepper, celery, and cook that until it's mush, which is a technical term for just really cooking it down until it's super, super soft. With a lot of dishes and stews and soups, you want your veggies to have a little crunch. You don't for this. We really want to cook it down really, really good. Then we're going to add the meat back in, add the broth, and add any spices, salt, pepper, bay leaves, thyme, stuff like that. And then you want to let it simmer. Now, traditionally, gumbo usually simmers for 3 hours to all day. This is one of those dishes that you start in the morning and then you just simmer it all day till you eat it at night on a nice low simmer, not a high boil the whole time, of course. I usually make it in the morning and then we'll eat it at night. If I get lazy and forget and I start it late, we'll just enjoy it whenever. But then leftovers are just always amazing because it has that longer simmer. So if I cook it and we eat it right away, I'll let all the extra simmer and simmer and simmer and simmer while the rest of the evening, and then put it in the fridge, and the next day the leftovers taste even better. So if you can remember to start this early, it will really, that's the more traditional way. Oh, this smells so good. Now you're getting a lot of your flavor from these meats. So again, an Andalouse sausage is going to have a lot more flavor. If your kids are really sensitive to spice, you could just use your traditional beef sausage. You'll still get some great sausage flavor, but you won't get the same spice out of it. And again, we're not trying to cook this all the way because that's going to happen when we simmer it for so long. We're really just trying to brown it and get some browning in these flavors. So don't stir it too often. Let it cook for a while, stir it, let it cook for a while, stir it, let it cook for a while, stir it. I don't use a crock pot, Dan, because I want it to simmer, not just be warm for that long. So I guess after you cook this all, you could put it in the crock pot, but I just keep it on the stove and stir it whenever I go by, every couple of hours or so. Personal preference though. Alright, so it looks like, that is so weird. I am not getting any comments on YouTube. That's just really, really weird that nobody's watching over there. Okay. Looks like it is working on Facebook. Good, Margaret. Hello. Stephanie, welcome. Stephanie, I'm not posting it on your page. It's posted on my page, so you do not have to watch it. You're getting a notification if you follow my page, but again, you don't have to click over. All right, we're getting some nice browning going on. I'm going to give it just another couple minutes, and then we'll be done. Now, of course, you can You can use more or less sausage or chicken. Obviously mine is sausage heavy with less chicken. You can go more chicken, less sausage, whatever you prefer. It's the best part about cooking from scratch is getting able to personalize it. All right, I'm going to take this off now. And forgot to get a bowl out. All right, I'm going to take all the meat out, but I'm going to use a strainer of some kind so that all of the great meat that we've gotten from browning this sausage and chicken is going to stay in the pan and add more flavor to the roux that we're making next. Oh, come on. There we go. Oh. As soon as my kids came up and saw all the veggies and sausage off to the side, they knew exactly what I was making and they were so excited. It was seriously their favorite dinner, and we haven't had it in quite a while. For a while they were eating it so often. That I think we got a little sick of it, which is shocking, but we did. Alright, it's always worse getting the last of it out. Alright. So now we're going to add more oil. You could add butter instead for your roux. I do that when I'm making, and we're going to add the flour. I use butter as my base for a lot of my soups, but for this one, this is just how I was taught, was the oil. You want to stir it and get all those chunks of flour out. And traditionally, a roux is made with a wooden spoon. I personally haven't noticed a difference with any utensil that I've used. That's just kind of the superstition, I guess, that your roux won't turn out properly if you don't use a wooden spoon. I don't know why. But yeah. Alright, so right now we have a nice almondy color, and this is the color that I usually get to when I'm making my other sauces. It gives a little bit of a nutty flavor, and it still thickens, but we're going to keep going to like a nice dark copper. And what that dark copper does is it gives us a much stronger, better flavor. Now you can use any pan you want. I do like using cast iron because I love the flavor that cast iron adds to this dish. But again, personal preference and what you have. Now what I'm basically doing, I like to use wooden spoons with a flat bottom for this so I can keep scraping the bottom so that I don't get a bunch of burned stuff on the bottom, especially since we just sauteed all that meat. If you do have a spot that's feeling a little stuck, just go over it a couple times, scrape it down. Now, the other thickeners that are traditional with gumbo are okra or filet powder. And filet powder is made with ground sassafras. And that is not actually thickened at the beginning. In the case of using filet powder, you actually add that at the end. So, but a roux or the okra are thickened at the beginning. With the okra thickener, you cook it and thicken a base like this. Then you take it out while you cook the veggies and then re-add it later. I don't know. I have never been a fan of okra, which is probably why I gravitated so much to this Creole version versus a Cajun gumbo. The funny thing is, I love a lot of Cajun dishes, but I prefer gumbo Creole. I know, I'm probably really, really weird. If you are watching over on YouTube and you can hear and see me okay, could you leave me a comment letting me know? I haven't gotten any comments and I just want to make sure that it's working okay. Alright, so I'm going to keep cooking this. I turned the temperature down a little bit. It was on medium-high for cooking the meat. Turn it down to medium for this. And it's okay to just kind of let it take its time to get to that color that we're going for. No reason to rush it, because then you'll get, instead of getting a nice flavor and color, if you cook it too high and too fast, you'll actually get it burnt. And there's a difference between cooking this to a nice dark copper or brick red is like really the furthest you can go with this, than there is to burnt. When I'm going for such dark roux, I also like to prefer using oil instead of butter. I feel like butter burns too quickly and too easily, which is why I feel like it's great for pasta sauces or cream-based soup sauces starters, but not for this. But butter definitely has an amazing flavor, so if you want to use it, totally go that route. Just watch it carefully so that it's not burning. Oh, come on, camera. There we go. Are there any questions? Oh, good. Susan, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Dee Dee, hi. Welcome, welcome. Margaret, you love your wooden spoons. Your mom always used them. I have a lot of wooden spoons. This is one of my favorites. I love this shape and coloring. All right, so we're already getting darker. We've kind of gone from that pale almondy color to a nice dark tan. Again, we're wanting to go all the way to a nice dark copper. So we're going to keep going. Now I have my veggies already cut and prepped. We have onion, bell pepper, and celery. Now I've mentioned this before. I don't love celery. It is just, to me, it just feels like a waste. It's just, especially when you're cooking something down like this. I get that a lot of people like the crunch. My mom likes it in tuna fish. I get that a lot of people like the crunch of celery, but to me it just doesn't taste like anything, so what's the point? I'd rather put in something that has flavor. But something like this where you're cooking it down, the veggies down to a mush, I just don't see the point. But it's traditional. It's the trinity of veggies in all Creole and Cajun cooking, so we're gonna add it. I just don't add a ton. I'd rather add more onion and more bell pepper. I'm gonna add more. Getting darker. Now see all those little like chunks that we're getting in there? Those are left over from the sausage and chicken, and it's fine. They're just going to add to the flavor, so don't worry if yours isn't a perfectly smooth paste. Now can you see how much thinner it is than it was at the beginning? When you first stir in your oil and flour together, it's pretty thick paste. And you can see how it works as a thickener, but the longer you cook it and the darker it gets, the more flavorful, but the less it works as a thickening agent, which is why this gumbo tends to be more on the thinner side versus the thicker Cajun version of this. What temperature is the stove on? I have it on medium-high now. If I'm using butter, I would cook it on medium, but since I'm using oil, I'm doing medium-high. Oh, we're getting closer. Now if you want, you can do this at the same time you're cooking your meat and just cook your meat in a different bowl. I like to cook my meat in the same bowl and then take it out because I like the flavor that it adds to the roux to have that meat having been cooked the same one. Okay, I'm starting to get the right smell that I'm familiar with. We're getting close. This smells, because of the oil, kind of like popcorn to me when we hit this stage. It's already really, really dark. This is like a light brown at this point. good news. Yesterday I hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. I am super excited. This means I will be getting my first play button. I am so happy. Alright. Now usually I would let this go a little bit longer, but because we're live, I'm just going to go ahead and move on to the next stage now, where we're adding the veggies to this. Okay, so we're going to add our onions, our peppers, and our celery. And again, this is a really easy dinner. It's just time consuming, and that each of these steps just takes a little bit of time. Making the roux just takes a little bit of time. Cooking these vegetables down to mush just takes a little bit of time. And then of course the simmering for 3 hours up to all day, it's just time. But that's it. It's just a super, super simple dinner, other than just time. Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate that. Okay. So typically this takes about 10 to 15 minutes, or it doesn't take a ton of time to cook this all the way down, especially since everything's already so hot. So just stir it occasionally, keep scraping the bottom so that nothing burns, and then this is a great time to prepare your other ingredients. So for the tomatoes, you can use diced tomatoes. I use Ro-Tel. It's a brand of tomatoes that includes tomatoes and green chilies in it, again for just kind of a little bit more flavor, but if all you have is diced tomatoes, that'll work just fine. And then we have the chicken broth. We have salt and pepper. Oops, spilled pepper everywhere. Bay leaves, and then of course all of the meat that we already cooked that we're going to add to that as well. That's everything. So you can get all of that together. I like to make my own broth. I use Better Than Bouillon, so that I don't have to keep a bunch of broth around. I just keep that little bouillon packet around and in my fridge, and then I can make whatever size broth that I want for a recipe without having like open containers of broth everywhere. So that's just my preference. I start with 6 cups of broth, and then if I need to add any more liquid, I'll just use water. But I do tend to make my broth a little on the strong side, just in case I'm going to add more water. I'll still get that great flavor out of it, but I don't have to make broth a second time. So typically you add your bouillon about a teaspoon for every cup of water, and I just kind of add a full teaspoon, right? If that makes any sense. Ugh, this is cooking beautifully. There's just not much better than the smell of onions cooking. So good. And I still have the heat on medium-high since I'm stirring, but if I was like going to leave this and walk away, I would just keep it on medium until it cooked. Oh, we're getting a great gravy base from this. Just perfect for the soup. Now, if you like your gumbo on the thicker side, just add less liquid. We tend to like ours a little bit runnier, and because it's served, this soup and is served over rice, rice just helps spread it. This is, I hate to say poor man's food because that's not what it is, but like how beans and rice are just a great, cheap, quick, easy poor man food. This is kind of that same thing. Obviously the meat, not so much. But it's just one of those things that everybody has their own version. You can add so many different things into this, and it's still considered gumbo. Really making it your own, and the rice just helps spread it so you can serve more people. This is a really traditional dish for making a huge pot, a huge batch, and sharing it with your neighbors and with your family and with your friends. And this is one of those dishes that I will make it on the less spicy side. Instead of using the andalouse sausage, I'll use just a beef sausage, and I'll make it a little less spicy but still flavorful, and take this to people when they've had a baby because they can just leave it in the fridge, heat up one bowl at a time as they want. It's a great large gathering dish. All right, so this is all cooked, and you can see why they call it mush at this point. The veggies are nice and soft and cooked all the way through. Add the broth now. And give it another stir, just scraping the bottom. Thank you, Susan. Again, and the side, just making sure we're getting all of that flavor mixed in. All right, so now we have our tomatoes. I'm going to add the salt and pepper. And I add about a teaspoon of salt and a quarter teaspoon of pepper to start with, but I always end up adding more. I will cook it for a couple of hours and then taste it and see if it needs a little bit more. All right, now we're going to add all of our meat back in. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Pushed the wrong thing. I'll try to keep it low. Ooh, so it doesn't splash everywhere. Now, if you are going to add a shellfish to this, I don't recommend adding it at the beginning like this. Shellfish does not need to boil for 3 hours. I would wait until you got to about a half an hour before eating, and then prep your shellfish and put it in. It should only take about 10 minutes, if that, tops, for your shellfish to cook. It actually often just 5. Kind of depends on what shellfish you're using. If you're using clams, a little bit longer. If you're using shrimp, literally 5 minutes is enough. All right. Then finally we're going to add our bay leaves. Now obviously when you go to serve this, take the bay leaves out. They are just there to add flavor. And put a lid on it. Then you want to bring this to a simmer and, oh, what did I just do? Bring this to a simmer, and like I said, a minimum of simmer time, like just for a great full flavor, traditionally is 3 hours. I have served it as quickly as 20 minutes afterwards. Oh, Brooklyn, I forgot to make the rice. I meant to make the rice before all of this. Anyway, so yeah, I would boil it for, I bring it to a boil, then turn it down to a simmer, and then let it simmer for as long as possible to bring out the best flavor. Since I forgot to cook rice, because I'm a dork, I can't really show you a finished bowl. As soon as the chicken is cooked all the way through, because we already browned it, so it shouldn't take long, you can serve it any time after that. Again, you'll get more flavor the longer that you let it simmer, so I recommend a longer time. But that is just how quickly it is to put this together. Bring it to simmer, walk away. So I'm going to let this come to a simmer, kind of show you that final broth stage, and then end, since I don't have any. I was gonna make some rice, totally went out of my brain. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I wanted to do something that was a little bit quick and shorter, because I'm sure a lot of people have some Cinco de Mayo celebrating to get to, so yeah. We're almost to a simmer, but I can show you at least that. And we'll be done. And I will see you next Tuesday. Kim, you thought I said thyme in as well. Thyme is a traditional spice that a lot of people put in it. I do have some thyme actually. I often don't put it in because I don't have thyme regularly, but I do. I forgot I do today. This is not one of those dishes that I'll specifically buy thyme for, but if I have it around, I will use it. So thank you for the reminder. Okay. I'm just looking for some nice healthy sprigs. I had some for another recipe from last week. So I will you can either scrape the thyme off, or you can just put them in as sprigs and just remember to pull the sprigs out later. Another thing that you can do when you're using fresh herbs like this is get some twine and tie it together. I'm trying to get the stronger stronger stems. Use some twine and tie it together, and then that way you can just take the whole bundle out when you're done. I had some, there it is. Hold on. There we go. So now that it's come to a boil, I'm going to turn it down. So you can see that this is not going to be like that super thick brown that's traditional with a Cajun gumbo. This is more on the watery side, but it's just amazing the full flavor that this has. All right. And that is it. That is just how quick and easy it is to make this. And now I'm going to go make some rice. Are there any other questions that I can answer about this before I say goodbye? Looks delicious. Thank you. Very thorough with your demonstration. Oh, thank you, Kim. I appreciate that. I try to not just teach a recipe, but also teach the background of the recipe and why it works, so that when you're at home and you're experimenting, you can feel confident in making changes and personalizing it to you. So, Dee Dee, Kristen, no, I did not use okra. I used a roux for the thickener, not okra for a thickener. This is a Creole Gumbo, not a Cajun Gumbo. Dee Dee, you're welcome. Margaret, looks delicious. Thank you. Okay. That is it. I will see you guys at the same time next Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining me today. And remember, anytime that you make any of the recipes on my blog, don't forget to, if you share a picture of it on social media, to tag me, Ashlee Marie Cakes, or hashtag makes them awesome, and I will reshare it in my Instagram stories. So thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys next week.